The morning rush at Langford and Company headquarters was in full swing. The glass-paneled skyscraper gleamed in the early sun, its polished metal logo catching the light like a beacon to every corporate professional in the city. Inside, the marble-floored lobby echoed with the clicking of heels, the hum of quiet conversations, and the rhythmic beeps of security scanners as employees swiped their badges. At the front security desk, Mike Barrett sat tall in his chair, his navy blue uniform perfectly pressed, his gold security badge polished to a mirror shine. Mike had been on the job here for nearly 15 years, long enough to know the regular faces, the seasonal interns, and the high-ranking executives who always seemed to be in a hurry. His reputation was built on one thing: no one got past him without proper clearance. That morning, while checking his monitor, Mike noticed someone approaching through the revolving glass doors. She was a black woman in her late 30s, dressed in a sharp but understated charcoal blazer over a white blouse, dark jeans, and clean sneakers, an outfit that didn't match the polished business attire most execs wore here. She carried no company badge, no briefcase, just a slim leather laptop bag slung over her shoulder. Mike's eyes narrowed. No badge meant no entry, and he had heard enough stories about random people trying to slip upstairs for meetings they didn't have. The woman stepped up to the security desk, offering a polite smile. "Good morning. I'm here for a meeting on the 42nd floor." Mike straightened in his seat. "Do you have an employee ID?" "No, I'm new," she said evenly. "It's my first day, actually. Mike cut her off, holding up a hand. "Ma'am, without a badge or a registered visitor pass, you can't enter the building. Company policy." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but her voice remained calm. "I was told I'd get my badge when I arrived." Mike shook his head. "Doesn't work that way. You need to be checked in by an employee on the security list." "Who are you here to see?" She gave a small, amused smile. "Technically, everyone." Mike didn't laugh. "Look, I'm sure you have somewhere important to be, but rules are rules. I can't let you in unless someone comes down to verify." The woman studied him for a moment, her eyes flicking briefly toward the elevator bank, then back to his steady, unyielding stare. "All right," she said at last, pulling out her phone. "Let's get someone down here then." Mike nodded firmly, convinced he was doing his job. What he didn't know was that the call she was about to make would set off a chain of events that would turn his morning, and maybe his entire career, upside down. Mike watched closely as the woman scrolled through her contacts. She moved with a kind of deliberate calm, her thumb tapping once before she lifted the phone to her ear. "This is Jordan," she said into the receiver, her tone professional but casual. "I'm in the lobby. Could you send someone down?" Mike leaned back slightly in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. The way she said, "I'm in the lobby," made him think she expected the world to rearrange itself for her. He'd seen that before. Pushy clients, entitled guests, even people trying to bluff their way into boardrooms. It always ended the same. He stood his ground. They left embarrassed. "Thanks," she said after a short pause, ending the call. She slipped the phone into her bag and met his eyes. "Someone's on their way." Mike gave a single curt nod. "We'll see." The lobby bustled around them, heels clicking, the echo of the revolving door, snippets of polite greetings between coworkers. Yet the space between them felt oddly still, like a pocket of quiet in the middle of the storm. "So," Mike said after a moment, "first day, huh? What department?" She smiled faintly. "I suppose you could say leadership." "Leadership?" Mike repeated, his eyebrows raising a fraction. "Like management?" "You could call it that." Her non-committal answers only fueled his skepticism. In his mind, real employees, especially new ones, were eager to explain who they were and why they belonged. This woman seemed content to keep him guessing. "You know," he said, leaning forward slightly, "a lot of people try to get in here saying they have meetings upstairs. They throw out big titles or vague departments. But the people who actually work here, they don't play games." She tilted her head slightly, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I'm not playing games. Then why not just tell me exactly who you're here to meet?" "Because," she said evenly, "I'd rather wait for them to tell you themselves." Mike's jaw tightened. He didn't like feeling like someone was withholding information, especially in his lobby on his watch. Minutes ticked by. Mike kept his gaze locked on the elevator bank, expecting a mid-level manager or maybe a flustered HR rep to appear. Instead, he saw Charles Ingram, the company's chief financial officer, striding across the marble floor toward them with surprising speed. The CFO rarely came down to the lobby for anything. The sight of him here sent a flicker of confusion through Mike's certainty. But he brushed it off. Whatever was going on, he told himself, it was still his job to control the flow of who got upstairs. And until Charles or anyone else said otherwise, the woman wasn't going anywhere. He didn't realize the next 2 minutes would start unraveling his assumptions completely. Mike's eyes tracked the CFO's approach. Charles Ingram was a tall man in his early 50s, always impeccably dressed, always walking with the urgency of someone whose time was worth more than gold. He didn't waste steps, and he certainly didn't waste them on casual visits to the lobby. The woman beside Mike turned slightly, watching Charles approach with an expression that was calm but familiar. Not the strained smile of someone hoping to be recognized, but the quiet assurance of someone who expected it. When Charles reached them, he didn't even glance at Mike at first. His attention went straight to her. "Jordan," he said warmly, extending both hands. "You made it." She accepted his handshake with a small smile. "Good to see you, Charles." Mike blinked. Wait, she knows the CFO? Charles released her hands and immediately turned to Mike, his expression polite but puzzled. "Why is she still down here?" Mike straightened instinctively. "She didn't have a badge or a visitor pass, sir. I was following protocol." Charles's brows lifted slightly, as if the explanation wasn't quite computing. He looked back at Jordan, then returned his gaze to Mike. "Do you know who this is?" Mike hesitated, glancing at her. Her eyes stayed on him, steady but unreadable. "No, sir," Mike admitted. Charles's lips twitched in the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of the kind that said, "You're about to find out, and you won't forget it." "Jordan Davis," Charles said clearly, "is the new chief executive officer of Langford and Company." The words hit like a stone dropped into still water, sending a shockwave through Mike's carefully constructed certainty. For a moment, all he could hear was the hum of the lobby, the low murmur of voices, the faint ding of an elevator arriving, while his brain scrambled to reconcile what he'd just heard. Jordan? The CEO? The CEO? Mike had imagined the new CEO would sweep in with an entourage, dressed in a $1,000 suit, flanked by assistants and PR staff. Instead, she'd walked in alone, no fanfare, wearing sneakers, and he'd treated her like a potential trespasser. "I didn't know," he managed at last. Jordan's tone was gentle, but her words carried weight. "No, you didn't. But you had a choice in how you handled it." Charles gave Mike a look that was neither angry nor forgiving, just pointed. "I'll take her upstairs now," he said. "Make sure this doesn't happen again." Mike stepped aside, his polished shoes suddenly feeling heavy against the marble floor. As Jordan and Charles walked toward the private elevator, she glanced back once, not with malice, but with a look that told him she remembered everything. And Mike had the sinking feeling the conversation upstairs might not go in his favor. The moment the private elevator doors closed behind Jordan and Charles, the lobby seemed to fall into a different kind of silence. People still moved through, employees swiping badges, visitors checking in, but to Mike, everything felt muted, like he was hearing it from underwater. He sat back down at his post, his eyes fixed on the elevator bank. The digital floor display ticked upward. 15, 26, 38, 42, the top, the executive level. Mike had worked in this building long enough to know what the 42nd floor represented. Glass-walled offices, panoramic city views, and a level of authority that shaped the entire company. And now, the new leader of all of it had walked right past him after he'd tried to block her. Great first impression, Barrett, he thought bitterly. He tried to focus on his job, scanning the next ID badge, directing a courier to the service elevator, answering a phone call about parking validation. But his mind kept circling back to the image of Jordan standing at his desk, cool and composed, letting him dig himself deeper with each assumption. Meanwhile, upstairs, on the 42nd floor, the executive conference room was already filled. Senior managers, department heads, and administrative staff stood when Jordan entered. She didn't rush to the head of the table. Instead, She took a slow, deliberate walk around it, shaking hands, exchanging brief words with each person. Her sneakers squeaked faintly against the polished floor, a sound that seemed to put some people off balance. They were used to leaders in high heels or leather Oxfords, not this deliberate defiance of the unspoken dress code. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but commanding. Thank you all for being here on short notice. I wanted my first day to be about listening, to hear from each of you before I start making changes. But before we do that, she paused, letting her gaze sweep the room. I had an interesting experience in the lobby this morning. Some glanced at each other. A few chuckled nervously, not sure if it was meant to be a joke. Jordan continued, I arrived without a badge or a grand introduction. I wanted to see how a stranger is treated when they come to this building. And I was reminded of something important. The first impression anyone gets of this company isn't from our marketing or our quarterly reports. It's from the people at that front desk. Back in the lobby, Mike shifted in his chair, wondering what she was saying up there. He imagined every word, how she might describe him as overly suspicious, maybe even disrespectful. A delivery driver approached, asking for directions to the accounting department. Mike gave him the information automatically, barely hearing himself speak. His focus was on the clock, and on the possibility that any minute now, someone from HR might appear to have a quick chat. The phone at his desk rang. He picked it up, heart thudding harder than it should have. Mike, said a voice from upstairs, the CEO wants to see you, now. Mike's pulse quickened as he stepped into the private elevator for the first time in his 15 years at Langford and Company. He'd seen plenty of executives vanish behind its mirrored doors, but never had a reason or an invitation to ride it himself. The space was silent except for the soft whir of machinery and the faint music piping through hidden speakers. The ride felt both too fast and too slow. He wanted it to be over, yet dreaded arriving. When the doors slid open on the 42nd floor, the air felt different, cooler, cleaner, with a subtle scent of expensive coffee and polished wood. The lighting was softer than the bright fluorescence downstairs, and the carpet under his shoes muted his steps. An assistant, a young man in a perfectly tailored suit, was waiting just outside. Right this way, Mr. Barrett Mike followed him through a hallway, lined with framed photographs. The company's history in black and white, portraits of past CEOs, shots of ribbon cuttings and charity galas. He couldn't help noticing the empty frame at the end of the hall, waiting for Jordan's portrait to be added. The conference room doors were open. Inside, the executive team sat around a gleaming mahogany table. Jordan was at the head, leaning back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp, assessing him from the moment he stepped inside. Mike, she said, gesturing to an empty chair near the end of the table. Please, join us. The invitation was polite, but the weight behind it made him feel like he was walking into a courtroom. He sat, his posture rigid, hands folded in his lap. I wanted to bring you up here, Jordan began, her voice steady and clear, because this morning you gave me my very first Langford and Company experience, before I even reached my desk. Mike cleared his throat. Ma'am, I was following protocol. You didn't have a badge, and she held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. I understand, and I appreciate that you take building security seriously. But I also noticed something in how you approached me. You assumed I didn't belong. The room was silent, all eyes fixed on them. I did what I'm trained to do, Mike said carefully. If someone doesn't have proper clearance, they wait. Jordan nodded slowly. True. But let me ask you this. If I had walked in wearing a tailored suit and carrying a designer briefcase, would you have treated me differently? Mike hesitated, knowing the honest answer would hang in the air like smoke. Maybe, he admitted. Jordan leaned forward slightly. That's the problem. Protocol should be applied evenly, but respect should be unconditional. The first person any visitor meets, whether they're a new intern, a delivery driver, or the CEO, shapes their perception of our entire company. Today, you shaped mine. The sting of her words was softened only by the fact that she wasn't shouting or humiliating him. She was stating facts, clear and controlled. I'm not here to fire you, Mike, she added after a pause. I'm here to make sure this moment becomes a turning point, for you and for how we think about our frontline interactions. A murmur of agreement passed among the executives. Mike exhaled slowly, realizing that while he'd made a serious mistake, he was also being handed an unexpected chance to learn from it. The room was still, but the atmosphere had shifted. Jordan's words lingered in the air like a subtle perfume, strong enough to be noticed, impossible to ignore. Mike waited, unsure if she was finished with him or about to dismiss him back to the lobby. Instead, Jordan leaned back in her chair, tapped her fingers lightly against the polished wood, and said, "Mike, I want you to be part of something starting today." His brows furrowed. "Part of something?" "Yes," she replied, her tone deliberate. "I'm launching a company-wide initiative to improve the way we greet and handle every person who walks through those doors. From the top floor to the mailroom, every interaction matters, and I think you're the right person to help lead it." The words caught him off guard. He'd expected a reprimand, maybe a formal warning in his file, not an invitation to lead anything. "I'm not an executive," Mike said cautiously. "I'm just—" "Not just," Jordan cut in. "You're the first face people see when they enter this building. You have more influence over first impressions than anyone sitting at this table. That's a position of power, whether you realize it or not." Some of the executives exchanged glances, a few nodding in agreement, others looking skeptical. "I want you to work with HR and our hospitality consultants," she continued. "You'll review our check-in process, help train new security staff, and shadow reception teams in other offices to learn best practices. Then, you'll report directly to me with recommendations." Mike felt the weight of the assignment settling on his shoulders. This wasn't a token gesture. It was real responsibility. "Why me?" he asked. Jordan's answer was immediate. "Because you've been here 15 years. You know the building, the people, and the policies better than most. But you also made a mistake this morning, and that gives you the perspective to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." The truth in her words landed hard. She wasn't sugarcoating it. She was turning the very moment that could have damaged him into a chance for growth. "You'll still work your regular shifts," she added, "but I expect you to carve out time for this project. And I expect progress." Mike nodded slowly. "All right, I'll do it." Jordan's gaze softened slightly. "Good. Then let's make the front door of Langford and Company a place that welcomes without lowering its guard." For the first time that day, Mike felt something other than anxiety, a spark of pride, mixed with the cautious hope that maybe this embarrassing morning could lead somewhere better than he'd imagined. 2 weeks later, the Langford and Company lobby looked and felt different. The marble floors still gleamed. The revolving doors still whispered open and closed with each arrival, but there was a noticeable change in the air. Warmer greetings, quicker assistance, a subtle undercurrent of attentiveness. Mike stood at his post, his uniform crisp, but there was a new addition on the desk, a sleek tablet-based check-in system he'd helped select. Next to it was a small sign, "Welcome to Langford and Company." "We're glad you're here," a detail he'd personally suggested. The past days had been a whirlwind. He'd sat in HR meetings, joined calls with hospitality consultants, and even visited a luxury hotel lobby to observe how their staff handled guests. Every note he took, every idea he gathered was aimed at one goal: creating a system that was both secure and welcoming. This morning was a test. Jordan was scheduled to arrive, but she'd made it clear she would enter without fanfare, just as she had that first day. The return. At 8:47 a.m., she appeared through the revolving doors. Same quiet stride, same understated blazer, but this time paired with dark slacks and polished flats. No badge, no entourage. Mike smiled as she approached. "Good morning, Ms. Davis. Welcome back." Jordan arched one brow, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "No badge again. You're going to let me in?" "Of course," Mike said with a nod. "After we get you checked in properly." He gestured to the new tablet system. "Takes less than 30 seconds. She played along, entering her name. The screen lit up green, and a soft chime confirmed her access. Mike stepped out from behind the desk and offered a small welcome packet, another one of his touches, with a company map, a list of key contacts, and a coffee voucher for the building cafe. "You've been busy," she said, flipping through the packet. Trying to make sure nobody else's first impression is like yours, Mike replied honestly. A public acknowledgement. An hour later, Mike was called upstairs again. This time, the conference room was fuller than before. Executives, department heads, and a few floor supervisors. Jordan stood at the head of the table. I want to start today, she began, by recognizing someone who's made an immediate impact. She looked toward the door, and Mike felt every pair of eyes turn to him. 2 weeks ago, Mike and I had what you might call a rocky introduction, she said, earning a few chuckles. But instead of letting that moment define him, he took ownership. He's implemented new procedures, collaborated with multiple teams, and already improved our guest experience. She gestured for him to step forward. Mike did so, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. This, Jordan concluded, is what leadership looks like. Not a title, but a choice to take responsibility and drive change. Thank you, Mike. Applause filled the room. Mike, unused to being the center of attention in a room full of executives, simply nodded and said, "Just doing my job, a little better than before." As he rode the elevator back down to the lobby, he realized something. The embarrassment of that first day hadn't just faded. It had been replaced by a sense of purpose. And every person who walked through those glass doors from now on would benefit from it.